I can see the day where maybe the majority of new solo GPs are basically, it's a solo GP plus some form of like an agent that's assisting them and doing the work that they might have otherwise hired somebody for. I think the one thing that's interesting is if you follow that through, then there is one problem, which is what's the differentiation? If you wind up with the same set of tools vendors, just like has happened in the hedge fund space, it's like, okay, then that's going to force you to think about how can you differentiate either selection or how you help those companies going forward.
Hi everyone, this is Alistair, and thanks for tuning in to the Venture Variety Show. In this episode, I speak with Don Butler. Don is Managing Director at Thomvest Ventures. And Don has been there since February 2000, so he just celebrated his 25-year anniversary. It's an amazing run in VC. Don talks about his outlook on the venture industry. He talks about his focus at Thomvest Ventures. Don gives his take on what he's investing in, which includes wealth management and fintech. And we also get into the subject of AI. Don talks about its impact on jobs, AI investing, and how the venture industry is using AI, including how it's beneficial for solo GPs to use AI. So we cover a lot of ground here in this conversation, so let's jump in and meet Don.
Thomvest itself is actually coming up on its 30th anniversary. And so, I'd say as a firm, one of the things that's nice is we have the benefit of, one of the few benefits of growing older is you get the benefit of age and hindsight and looking at like where we are in the investing cycle and in parts of the market that are very much in a bubble compared to what previous bubbles felt like. And also you can use that to sort of plan ahead for, both the great run-up in valuations you would expect, but then also when gravity finally holds, what that might also imply for things like portfolio construction and the investing work we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. But that's an incredible time to start investing with Thomvest.
Yeah.
February 2000. And I remember that period well. And there was a lot of exuberance. There was a lot of excitement. And like you said, things were about to fall apart. We didn't know that.
Yeah, that's right. If you remember the nomenclature of the late 90s was like the new economy, right?
Yes.
It's like it's going to defy the rules of the existing economy. And, I think I also distinctly remember as things started coming back down in subsequent months, sort of seeing things happening that, one would not have expected. We had a company that was actually one of the last IPOs of 2000. And I remember the CFO calling from the roadshow on the IPO. And this was normally, if you've gone on a roadshow with a company in an IPO, you go to these different cities, you meet with investors, you hold breakfast meetings, and, 25, 30 analysts from different funds in Chicago or in, New York or Seattle show up. And the CFO calls me and says, Don, we had 6 people come to the breakfast meeting. Like, where'd they all go? It's like, well, things have started falling. The company still got out, still got public, then, eventually became a much larger company and got acquired. But, having sort of lived through that in the early days, I would say that we, see traces of that in the market we're in today when it comes to sort of AI valuations. And at the same time, as we've been sort of looking at the latest sort of major technology shift and everything we're seeing with AI, it actually feels much more significant than what we saw with the advent of the people starting to move onto the web. And obviously back in 2000, no one foresaw the extent to which we'd have like e-commerce or subsequent and things like that. But I'd say with AI, it does feel like it's a much more fundamental technical shift that we see happening today.
Yeah, but, please talk more about that, because it does feel like a huge shift. In many ways, we can compare it to 25 years ago. Some comparisons I think are strong. Other comparisons, maybe not. But because certainly the public market is a lot different than it was, at the end of 99 and 2000. Go ahead.
And if you, it's interesting, if you look at it today, I would say in hindsight, the internet felt like a new form of a new media channel or a new channel for communication. So on the one hand, that's had tremendous impact. It also, if you think about it, the impact that it had on the newspaper business or the impact that it's had on media more generally, and then more recently e-commerce. But even with e-commerce, I believe, the last time I looked at like a e-marketer data, I think the percentage of total commerce that is e-commerce in the US is probably something on the order of like 10 to 12%. Whereas one of the things I would say with AI is AI feels like it's much more pervasive, and the impact it's going to have on jobs is going to be much more distributed across the economy in ways that I don't think the initial internet was. And some of this will take, 5 to 10 years to play out. But, it's interesting. We already see, in effect, things that are feel more clerical in nature being sort of, directly impacted. Things like the paralegal profession or, others like what we're seeing with call centers. You're starting to see the impact there. But as these large language models get progressively better, and then also, I actually think, if you think about it, as it gets applied more and more to robotics, like I do feel like in the next decade, we will see like a much more fundamental shift in the economy and in the way people work. I remember going back to a study that we did back in the this is after the dot-com boom. There were something like 27 different companies that were antivirus companies that got funded right up to 2000. And you're sort of left with like, McAfee, Symantec, Trend Micro is kind of like, maybe Sophos or one others as sort of the winners. But it's like, okay, 3 to 4 out of 27. That means that there's also a lot of destruction of value in all these other companies. And I think you'll see something similar in a lot of the AI investing we see happening.
Do you see that across the AI? Because AI encompasses a lot. Do you see that going across the AI entire sector, from applied to generative to robotics, everything?
It's interesting. If I look at it, I do think that winner takes most kind of rule. I do think that that'll apply in things like the large language model vendors or in other sort of base technologies. The one thing that I do think is different is I don't think those will be the same winners in something like a vertical like financial services. Like I think there are distinct data sets that you would need to do things, and we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of work across both AI investing and cloud infrastructure investing, but then secondarily, we've also done a lot of work in financial services and fintech. And I think you'll see applications relying on the base large language model vendors that bring a distinct vertical focus. And so I think what you'll see is each vertical will wind up having sort of its leading 3 vendors in that space. And I'll take as an example an area that we've been spending a lot of time on, and that's wealth management. So, there's a lot of factors that are impacting sort of the registered investment advisor, the RIA space. I don't think it'll be a company we're invested in, Cohere or OpenAI or Anthropic, that is like the dominant application vendor in that space. I think they'll be powering the base models, but I think you'll also have, in effect, vertical software providers that bring the data of that space, but then also knowledge of like the regulatory requirements of that space, such that I would expect that you would see in the RIA space maybe 3 different vendors that become notable companies that serve the back office for RIAs. And so, vertical by vertical, I think you'll see that happening. So in that regard, it's I do think that there's a lot of great investments to be made across different verticals, and so it does feel like it's going to be there'll be a lot of winners coming out of all of this.
Going back to kind of jobs and displacement there, I don't think investors talk enough about this. Are people going to be losing their jobs? Are people going to be changing jobs? Are there going to be people who will be managing the AI agents? Is it just going to be a shift, or are people going to be losing jobs?
The thing that's interesting is every time we've seen this kind of shift, it's also created new types of jobs that we didn't have before. And so, I feel like where we are in this transition is we have clarity into what jobs people are no longer hiring for, or there's sort of massive disruption. The corollary is, though, that we haven't yet seen the jobs coming through that are like the next generation of jobs. Like for a while, people thought that, prompt engineering will become a major category and we'll have a new role of prompt engineers. But I think what we're seeing is like the combination of AI agents probably makes that less of a job category that you go into college and say, when I leave, I'm going to be a prompt engineer. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. And so I kind of feel like we're early enough that we're at that point in the cycle where we can see the changes coming. It's not 100% clear, like, what the next role will be. I would say I do think you'll see a set of roles that are kind of overseeing the agents and kind of like, hey, when something, and we see this today in machine learning, and I'll give you maybe a concrete example.
Yeah, please.
We've done a lot of work in credit and online credit in the fintech world. Typically, there's a phenomena that surprised me when I first saw it, which was that in credit, if you have a credit model, and that credit model, say I'm a credit card company and I'm issuing credit cards, I'm Capital One and I'm issuing credit cards. They will have sort of a credit model that might be sort of the dominant model for decisioning whether or not they provide somebody a credit card or the credit sort of pricing or the size of the credit line, all these things. But those models, when you put them into production, they actually degrade over time. And so a model might last 12 to 18 months, but then in the meantime, those organizations are working on like the refinements to that model and putting the next generation in place. And so having observed that behavior over like more than a decade of like financial services behavior, I suspect when we have agents like agentic technologies in things like call centers, yes, we'll have those, but I would actually hypothesize you'll see some of the same degradation. And so understanding like model drift and I'll tell you that in the credit world, people look at it and say, well, we think the models degrade over time for a combination of factors. One would be people's behavior changes over time, sort of the types of products like in loan products changes over time. Fraudsters also learn how to better defraud. And so there's a host of reasons why models tend to, fall out of whether it's compliance or become less, in the credit case, less capable of discriminating risk. And so I would suspect as we get into agentic technologies across different areas, you'll see something similar happen. And therefore there will be a new set of roles that'll be people that oversee the deployment of these models. And so I think that's a role that we can see coming.
Let's talk about the opportunities. What kind of companies are you seeing?
We do think there's a lot of macro things that will happen in the wealth management space. That's one reason we've been looking at. And I'll give a concrete example. There is this great wealth transfer that's about to take place. This is as folks get older and they start to pass on, especially like the boomer generation or, subsequent to that. I'm Gen X, like the Gen X generation, as we pass on. Sort of the tools to enable that. One problem for the category would be, interestingly, when somebody passes on, about 80% of the descendants who might be receiving something through a trust or something else actually pick a different financial advisor. And so most people don't stay with their parents' advisor. And so if you're one of those advisors who is managing wealth, you're trying to find ways to engage the next generation and sort of keep them, often by employing like digital tools. So we see that from the technical side of things. What we're seeing is people who are, and these are very interesting entrepreneurs who have done this before and been successful in prior companies, people who are applying agentic technologies to the back office for registered investment advisors to be able to take on tasks that they might have otherwise hired people to do. And so, sort of tying the two discussions together, what we're seeing is people saying, hey, we're not necessarily going to fire people, but as you grow your book of business and your book of clients, in one startup that we're looking at, they're basically saying, hire our digital agent to be the next person to process documents on behalf of your clients and help them understand, sort of what they have in their trust documents or, things like their reports that they might issue on a quarterly basis of how they're doing. We're seeing companies that'll, in effect, hire out digital agents. So it's kind of interesting there because if you look at it, it is an agent that basically is getting hired instead of a human to do back office work. And so, those are the type of companies that we're looking at today, and we're seeing variants of that across different parts of financial services.
Oh, that's amazing. I wanted to talk a little bit about staffing. Maybe we could talk about that, but also going back to talking about AI and agents. Are we seeing what's been the impact on venture investing itself? You must be seeing this as well.
Yeah, definitely.
How venture firms are being impacted by
the use of data and
AI-driven investing. Yeah,
I think one thing and I think we're not necessarily unique, but I do think we were early to sort of this belief, which was I think we saw what happened in the hedge fund world of hedge funds adopting technology and using that to sort of process all the data sets that were available. And so we looked at that and said, we think it's not going to be the exact same, but we think something akin to that will start to play out in venture. And so, if you go back, I think maybe 5 years ago now, we actually brought in our own, not full-time teams, but brought in our own team to do a front end, build our own CRM. So we've had our own front end, engineering person, back end engineer. And then periodically we employ people with like a data science background to look at the data sets that we have and help us define signal in that. And so, these days we license the Crunchbase API, we license a company called harmonic.ai. And then we also do a lot of work in sort of combining data across other data sets, and looking at things like LinkedIn, for instance. And so the result is that when you look at it, even before the agent revolution, there was already, I think, much more transparency around kind of the cohort of companies in a given market. To give an example, when I first joined venture, if you were to talk to anyone who was a general partner that was talking about their fund, they would talk about their proprietary deal flow. I have friends like Alistair who refer, their best
Yeah, for
entrepreneurs to
example.
me and things like that, right? And these days, I think the set of companies that are out there is much more transparent. You might still have a sense of like proprietary deal flow in the sense of, yes, we have people who refer, trusted friends and advisors who refer people to, entrepreneurs to us. But I also feel like the ability to look at a landscape of companies and understand a lot about those companies even before we first meet them has transformed the investment process. And then what we're seeing is we're now starting to see people like Harmonic now has like an AI agent within their platform that's in beta. If you log in, you'll see it in beta. You can begin to type in ChatGPT like queries and say, I'm interested in companies that look like, Data Robot or compete against them, but are at this stage and that are funded by these type of things, and
Right.
get an answer back out. And so now I think we see that at the vendor level. The one other thing I would say is that we've been testing using technologies like Cohere or like OpenAI to help in the investment process. And the way we've been doing that today is basically to say, take, and it's very, very kind of, block and tackle kind of work, I guess you could say, but take out of PitchBook the 26 odd categories of financial services or fintech companies and say, okay, we think the universe looks like this. Here are the list of companies in wealth tech that we're interested in. Dear, agent, go, look at a list of suspected companies, read through their websites, read through their LinkedIn pages, and pull information back in. And then we're going to do queries against that. And so what I find is where we're using technologies today, like large language models today, is on helping us label the universe and sort of say, okay, there's, I think right now, if you look at like venture-backed wealth tech companies that are specific to like advisors, like registered investment advisors, there's something like 70 startups in that space. So then you can hand one of these agents the information, like the website address for those 70 companies, and then ask them to then look at the websites and LinkedIn profiles for those companies, and then do like answer a series of questions. And so I think we're not that far away from like what one of my colleagues here would call an AI associate. Like I think that's
Well, that would be fascinating. It kind of ties back into what we were saying earlier in regards to how AI is impacting jobs. So
yeah.
maybe you don't have an investment associate, you have a data person
I
instead.
think that's much more likely. I think that's much more likely. And one thing that was interesting to me as we were looking at our planning for the year, we used to hire analysts, and we don't hire analysts anymore. And it's like, I love people at that level. We do hire folks coming out of MBA programs
Yeah.
who have like work experience or prior venture experience. But, already I'd say our hiring has changed, partly because some of the, and if you go back to part of what we talked about, might be some more clerical related work.
Hmm.
I think a lot of that's probably handled through, third party vendors that are providing data to us. And what's also interesting is you can, like one of the things we can do today is, and I know a lot of other venture firms do this, so feel free to sort of share it. But we'll use tools like Sales Navigator from LinkedIn
Yeah.
to say, okay, there are these 20 interesting companies in financial services or fintech that we're interested in. There's Stripe and PayPal and Klarna and whomever. When anyone who has a CXO title at one of those companies leaves and joins another company that has got an employee count of less than 20 people,
Yeah.
surface that list.
Okay.
And so now you can use tools like that to say, okay, if somebody's leaving a Stripe to go to a new startup, that's an interesting person to get to know. And now because of things like LinkedIn and because of some of the tools like Harmonic, you can very easily run a query and put those two data sets together and say, okay, here's a list of companies that we think are interesting ones to go talk to. And all of this work, I think, is automating some of the work of associates.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's running that query?
Today, one of our senior associates runs that.
Okay.
But even he has talked about. He's like, well, gosh, this feels like something we could automate. We could use
I
like
was
a
gonna
writer
say.
or somebody like this to, begin to automate even some of those tasks.
Well, and then talk more broadly about. Are you seeing venture firms cutting back on staff? Is it related to that? Is it the investors? Is it
Yeah.
more platform? I thought we were building up platforms and marketing people and talent.
Yeah.
specialists and biz dev people. But what kind of what are you seeing?
I think there's a bifurcation in the market.
Yeah.
You see it with the fundraising, or when, not too long ago we met with some of the investment team, and I won't name them by name, but it's like a very large fund that, started with a hedge fund now, but we meet with a team that is focused on AI investing in kind of Series B or C stage companies. And, they're managing a total 95 billion. They've got about 500 employees. There they have a full go-to-market team.
Yeah.
And, I think what you're starting to see that's different there is you're starting to see technology teams that get built, or like CTOs hired, or head of AIs hired. So I do think you'll see the platforms in those places continue to grow. On the other hand, when it comes to smaller firms like a $250 million fund like our own, or people that I know who have started like 25 to $75 million earlier stage funds, I think there's much more focus on AI,
Yeah.
and using tools to do the work that an associate might have otherwise done. And so I do think there's this bifurcation in the market between, call it continued employment at the bigger funds that are becoming more like wealth management corporations, and maybe a drop in overall employment at smaller funds where people look at it and say, well, we have a smaller fund, therefore we have a smaller sort of management fee, and I'm going to try and leverage technology to instead of hiring more staff to do work. The one other thing that I think, and this is not specific to the venture ecosystem, but I thought was kind of interesting. So I was at the sales kickoff for one of our portfolio companies yesterday, and they've gone very heavy into employing AI agents into their infrastructure, and they serve analysts in the marketing department in large companies. And one of the things they realize is that in their customer set, people are looking and saying, well, wait a minute, I can buy an AI agent who, works 24/7. If I get lots of people calling on that agent at the same time, it's scalable, and they don't take holidays,
Right.
I saw this analysis, which was, they said, okay, if that AI agent cost me 75,000 a year to buy as an agent, versus I pay 100,000 for an analyst to do some of the same work, but then I have to worry about, they aren't working 24/7. If I want 24/7 capability, I've got to hire 2 to 3 analysts. By the way, I also have to think about training and churn. Maybe that's a 4th analyst. And so, the comparison that they're seeing their clients make is, 3 to 4 people that might cost me $100,000 versus a $75,000 software-based agent that, is kind of scalable and doesn't take holidays. And I think that's the one time you sit back and say, well, that actually feels like that's going to be very disruptive. So I haven't yet seen that, coming back to the venture world, haven't yet seen that in the venture world, but it would not surprise me to see somebody having an AI associate that we could hire instead of hiring people in a year's time or 2 years' time.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the day when solo GPs were a rarity, and now they're much more common
much more common. Yeah, much more common
among emerging managers. And solo GP slash
yeah.
AI agent, right, will invest in your company. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I can see I can see the day where maybe the majority of new solo GPs are basically, it's a solo GP plus some form of like an agent that's assisting them and doing the work that they might have otherwise hired somebody for. I think the one thing that's interesting is if you follow that through, then there is one problem, which is what's the differentiation? If you wind up with the same set of tools vendors, just like it has happened in the hedge fund space, it's like, okay, then that's going to force you to think about how can you differentiate either selection or how you help those companies going forward. So I kind of feel like that's the next step is like, okay, if we can automate some of these tasks, well, then what do we do to have an edge over somebody else who's maybe using the exact same vendor to look at the exact same companies? Sometimes when you see new technical changes happening like this, and I think we talked about this briefly once before, but when you see new technologies roll in, you also begin to see elements of human behavior that are surprising, or audiences reacting in ways you didn't anticipate. And I would say recently we had that happen in discussions with people who had used the next generation of voice agents for call centers.
Oh, okay.
And what was intriguing was I'm used to thinking about calling into a call center and talking with like an interactive voice response system, which is more annoying, and you're trying to find a way to talk to a person. And what we're starting to see is actually the systems that are going in place now having the ability to pull sort of concurrently with the call coming in, pull information associated with that phone number of who that customer likely is, context on the transactions they've done. I think you'll see predictions of like, I think you're calling in because of this. Is that right? Like in a way, the agent knowing why you're calling. Like I think that's starting to happen. And so one of the counterintuitive metrics we've started to hear is people are calling in, talking with this next generation of voice agents, actually talking longer than they do with human agents.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, and so it's kind of, interesting. It's like, is that because it becomes a no cost
Yeah.
conversation for me to sort of ask a bunch of questions that I might not annoy another person with? Like, if I know that it's a digital agent, am I willing to, ask things that might sound stupid or might be embarrassing for me to ask? But hey, if it's not a person on the other end, like, I'm okay asking these questions. And so, or it could simply be a novelty effect, like people playing around with the technology because it's something new. But as we roll into this next generation of companies and the use of AI agents, for instance, I am wondering what it means for how people, what new behaviors we'll see as people start to engage with these.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I could go on for hours with you, Don. Last word, how would you like to close out? Any final thoughts?
Well, I'd just say that, we continue to be excited about what we're seeing. And for the entrepreneurs who might be tuning in, we have our sectors, but across those sectors, including like AI infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, financial services, or fintech, those are all areas that we're quite interested in. And so, we'd welcome the chance to, if you're at sort of the called seed, Series A, Series B level, welcome the chance to engage with folks as they continue to sort of build on their journey. In that regard, I also appreciate the chance to catch up with yourself, as it's always great to do so.
Yeah, likewise. Always great to connect with you, Don, and appreciate your time. And hey, thanks for your thoughts. Thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, thanks so much, Alistair.
Well, hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Don Butler from Thomvest Ventures. I've actually known Don for over 15 years. I used to work for I used to work for Thomson Financial, which was run by the Thomson family, including Peter Thomson, who started Thomvest Ventures. So I've known Don for a long time, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I always think that Don has great takes on what's going on in the venture world. In the meantime, please remember to like and subscribe to this video podcast. You can follow it on all the platforms, but I prefer you go to YouTube. On YouTube, you can also find my other podcast, The AI Cognitive Shift, which I do in collaboration with AInews.com. So, as always, drop in your suggestions and comments. Let me know who else you'd like to see on the Venture Variety Show, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.